reject the caricature of Christ that is presented. In other words, who goes to hell and why? I'll be, in a sense, damning people twice if they're presented with a distorted version of Christianity. Will anyone be judged for rejecting a false gospel, a false Christ, or a really bad synthesis or syncretism between
Yeah,
Christianity and some kind of political culture? What
yeah.
say you, Tom?
I think the first thing to say is that thank God that I am not God, and that neither Mike nor I are God,
Mm,
and it isn't up to us who God ultimately welcomes and calls his own, and how that plays out. These are mysteries which, just as Jesus himself said about the great coming day, he said, of that day no one knows, not the Son, not the angels in heaven, only the Father. So in the same way, I want to say there are all sorts of things about the ultimate future of all human beings which are known and will be known to God, and which are hidden from us at the moment. I think what's happened here is that people who have preached the gospel and have seen people come to faith and have seen a genuine change in their life and a new love of God and scripture and so on, and see that's what being converted looks like. Well, supposing they hadn't been converted, supposing they'd stayed in the sort of people they were, what might have happened to them then? And when you get that, then people say, well, there it is. If you're going to be saved, you've got to have all this stuff happen to you. And, do you know, I've hung out around church circles all my life, and there are many people I know of whom I want to say, this person, I'm quite sure, has the heart of the matter in them, but because of muddled teaching, because of bad examples, because of all sorts of things, they are not presenting in the way that a good modern Protestant evangelical Christian might expect them to. Now, this is not a cheap way of sliding down into some sort of universalism. I've never been a universalist. It seems to me
mm,
that the New Testament presents us with a fairly stark choice, that there is the possibility of final loss. The question then is, how would we describe that final loss, and how might we hazard a guess as to what constitutes candidacy for that final loss? I mean, that's the question. And I think, again, I want to say, I don't want to be too dogmatic about this. I don't want to be undogmatic and say that, we don't know anything at all about it, because I think we do know some things. I think we do know that anyone who comes to Jesus and says, Lord, I believe, help my unbelief, that person, they will embrace Jesus, Jesus will embrace them. And even if things look a bit rocky and dodgy on the way, well, things look a bit rocky and dodgy for most of us at certain
mm.
stages. Sooner or later we hit patches like that. Does that mean we've fallen out of God's goodwill and pleasure? Probably not. It might do, but we have to be able to look in the mirror and say, am I fooling myself? Have I just been a hypocrite all this time? Is this really who I am, or am I just making it all up? I think we all need, as a regular spiritual exercise, to go through that kind of thing, like a spring cleaning. But then I do want to say that when you look at the other end of the scale and look at people who systematically corrupt, deface, distort, destroy other human beings,
Mm.
other countries by their political actions, um, uh, communities of people, including Christians, because they behave in such a way that it turns people away from the faith, etc. When you look at people like that and say, is God going to say at the end of the day, well, okay, never mind, I love you all anyway, then I find that very difficult to believe. Now, the danger with that is that I then sit on my high horse and become judgmental and say, well,
Mm.
I know I'm okay, but obviously Adolf Hitler isn't. Well, we choose the easy examples to fire off our salvos at. But it does seem to me that when people initiate or collude with thoroughly wicked, dehumanizing public or private behavior, I think I want to say they are in effect spitting in the face of the good creator, of God himself, and saying, yeah, maybe you did make this world like this, but I don't care. I'm just going to go my own way, and you can sort that out. And I think, as C.S. Lewis said once, there are only two sorts of people: those who ultimately say to God, "Your will be done," and
Yeah.
those to whom God will at the last say, "Your will be done." Now, how that great divide falls out, it's really quite difficult to see. There are times in the New Testament when we can see people turning very definitely away from God, away from Jesus, and Jesus appears to be saying they are on the way to final loss. Now, I mean, Judas would be the obvious example when Jesus
Yeah.
says it would be better for that man if he'd never been born. Now, he could hardly say that if he knew that Judas was going to spend all eternity rejoicing in the presence of God. It really implies that Judas is not among those. But what does that final loss look like? Here, our medieval imagery of hell really
Mm.
doesn't help, where I know many people, in America particularly these days, but in other parts of the world as well, are brought up thinking that believing in Christianity means believing in heaven and hell, that you either go to heaven or you go to hell. And I've spent much of my life arguing that's not what the New Testament says. New Testament is about new creation. And then the antithesis of new creation is to lose out, to miss out, not to be part of the new world which God is making. And from one point of view, the best way of talking about that is destruction or death, so that there is a sense in which the theological position known as annihilationism has something going for it, that when people ultimately turn away from God and say, "I do not want anything to do with you," whether explicitly or by implication through what they do, then that person simply ceases ultimately to exist. Or we could say, and I've tried to argue this here and there, they cease to exist as an image-bearing human being. They're saying, in effect, I no longer want to be somebody who is called to reflect God's wisdom into the world and reflect the praises of the world back to God. I just don't want to be that sort of creature anymore. And it's
Mm.
possible that they might then be told, you are still a creature, you are still existing in some way or other, but you are no longer an image bearer. That's a difficult and
Mm.
strange thing. It's
Yeah.
difficult partly because we're talking about people who we know, who
Mm.
seem to be going that way, and love and prayer would want to reach out and embrace them and say, please turn back from that way. So this is that's why this is a difficult conversation to be had, because otherwise we can very easily come across as we're the high and mighty ones who've got
Yeah.
it all sewn up, and that lot out there don't get it. I want to say, no, it's not like that. Once you look at the big issues, we all need to embrace humility and say, we don't know, and we are clinging on to Jesus. And if that is the case, it's by grace through faith and not because we're making ourselves clever or know it all or whatever. So that's where I would be, a sort
Yeah.
of a position which is like annihilation, but which may allow for some continuing existence in a sort of post-human or
Yeah.
less than human way. That was very difficult. As I say, this is not a happy
Mm.
topic to discuss, but it is a way of saying we can't assume, and we should not assume, that in the end God will say to everybody from Hitler downwards, upwards, whatever, yeah, it's okay, that was just a game, and some of you lost the game, but never mind, you're all coming to the party anyway. I just
Yeah.
don't think that's the message that we get in the Bible.